Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 9 Part 30 based on novel. So let's start. Sky Devouring Corpse. Lin Dong heard the somewhat stunned voice of Yang and was a little startled. He asked somewhat curiously, "What is that? Why does the devouring ancestral symbol in my body has such a reaction towards this thing? This thing is made from the devouring ancestral symbol. Why do you thinking there is a reaction?" Yang replied in an indifferent voice. "What?" Lin Dong's pupil suddenly shrunk. Even with his calmness, he still involuntarily inhaled a breath of cold air at this moment. His eyes revealed some shock as he looked at the dry black corpse inside the crystal coffin on the stage. This was made using the devouring ancestral symbol. Lin Dong could not be blamed for losing his composure. After all, he was considered the current owner of the devouring ancestral symbol. Yet, Yang was currently telling him that the corpse in front of him was made using the devouring ancestral symbol inside his body. How could he not be stunned? Moreover, if my senses are not wrong, it should be a devouring sky corpse that the devouring master had personally refined back then, Yang continued. Back then, the devouring master had gathered many mystical ingredients in the world, and refined 3 devouring sky corpses. 2 of them had been destroyed during the World War. This current one has likely managed to luckily survive. TSK, you are really quite lucky to be able to find this thing. Devouring master, Lin Dong curled his lips. He gradually suppressed the shock inside his heart, as his eyes shone while looking at the black corpse inside the crystal coffin. This thing was actually refined by a peak expert of ancient times. Since Lin Dong had obtained the devouring ancestral symbol, he was able to sense just how powerful it was. However, his current self clearly did not have the ability to do as the devouring master did back then, and use the devouring ancestral symbol to refine this so-called devouring sky corpse. Is it very powerful? Lin Dong quietly asked in his heart. A devouring sky corpse at its peak can fight with a general level Yimo. If we convert this to the ranking that you use, it should be equivalent to a Samara stage expert. Yang spoke in a faint voice. Samsara stage? Lin Dong's heart, which had just calmed down once again, began to involuntarily beat violently. He looked at the black corpse with some disbelief. He was really unable to believe that this thing could actually fight with a Samsara stage expert. This was equivalent to the strength of the Yuan Gate sect masters. Additionally, the devouring sky corpse possessed some properties of the devouring ancestral symbol due to them having been refined using the devouring ancestral symbol. This property is devouring power. This allows it to possess an indescribable defensive ability. Back then, the devouring master was being surrounded and attacked by 5 Great King level Yimos. A single devouring sky corpse had endured the full force attacks of the 5 Great King level Yimo before being destroyed. From a certain point of view, even a Samsara stage expert would be unable to destroy a devouring sky corpse at its peak condition. Lin Dong's face was filled with shock. This devouring sky corpse was actually so domineering? Then this devouring sky corpse, Lin Dong swallowed a mouthful of spittle. Would he not be unbelievably strong if he managed to obtain this devouring sky corpse? In that case, the matter of the nefarious bone old man would really not even be worth mentioning. You are overthinking things. Although this devouring sky corpse has survived, it has clearly suffered a serious damage, and will have difficulty reaching its peak strength. Yang unceremoniously poured a bucket of cold water over Lin Dong's head. Lin Dong smiled in embarrassment. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Can it be repaired? Yes, it can be repaired as long as one has the devouring ancestral symbol. Yang quickly replied. However, attempting to repair it with your current strength is not a simple matter. Back then, even the devouring master was only able to refine this devouring sky corpse after having complete control over the devouring ancestral symbol's power. It is fine as long as it can be repaired. Lin Dong's mouth parted into a smile. The heavens had delivered this devouring sky corpse to him. This was his opportunity, and he must not let it go. Otherwise, he would have nowhere to cry. However, do you really have the Xian Yuan pills to fight with others for this devouring sky corpse? Yang had once again turned Lindong into a statue with one sentence. After being stunned for a moment, he finally clenched his teeth and ruthlessly said, "At the very most, I will use a martial art in my possession to bid for it. I will obtain this devouring sky corpse at all cost. In any case, this thing would definitely be his." While Lindong was conversing within his heart, Tang Dongling on the auction stage pointed her delicate finger towards the black corpse in the crystal coffin and laughed. "It is rumored that this is something that had been dug out from deep under the sea. I am perhaps unable to give a detailed answer as to what it is. However, I can only tell everyone that this corpse is extraordinary. This is because a profound death stage expert from our sky merchant court had tried attacking it, only to end up failing to destroy it." Crash! Waves of noise was undoubtedly stirred immediately after Tang Dongling's words sounded. Many people's eyes were stunned as they looked at the seemingly ordinary black corpse. This thing was actually able to endure a profound death stage's full-force attack. "Miss Tang, is this a puppet?" A black-robed man from the seats at the front of the auction suddenly opened his mouth and spoke in a low voice. A black light rippled around him as he spoke. It seemed as though many illusions appeared around him, causing one to be unable to identify the actual body. "That fellow is Chen Ying from the illusionary demon sect. It seems that he is somewhat interested in this corpse." Some conversations emerged around him as the black-robed man uttered those words, swiftly spreading the identity of this person in the process. Lindong narrowed his eyes. This illusionary demon sect possessed quite a great reputation within this chaotic demon sea. Its strength was not weaker than the two great caves in the Heaven-Wind Sea region. It can indeed be considered as a puppet. However, Tang Dongling hesitated for a moment. However, she ultimately said, "Perhaps this thing requires a special control method. Otherwise, it seems difficult to activate it." Unable to activate? Many people were stunned upon hearing these words. Soon after, they laughed. What was the point of buying this thing if it was impossible to control? Could it be that one intended to use it as a shield? "Yang, this thing can't be controlled," Lindong immediately asked in his heart. "Others are indeed unable to control it. This is because they do not possess the devouring ancestral symbol. Only the owner of the devouring ancestral symbol can control it," Yang said. "In other words, only you alone in this entire world can control the devouring sky corpse." Lindong involuntarily licked his lips upon hearing this. The excitement deep within his eyes became even more intense. Chen Ying from the illusionary demon sect frowned because of Tang Dongling's words. He stared at the black corpse, and could vaguely sense that this thing was not so simple. "Let the auction begin. The auction price is 5 million Xian Yuan pills." Tang Dongling smiled and said, 5 million, it's too expensive. How can a puppet that cannot be controlled be worth this price?" "That's right." Some dissatisfied voices spread from the auction ground after her words sounded. It was likely that they believed this price was a little high. However, their dissatisfaction clearly had little effect. Hence, it became a lot quieter after the noises continued for some time. This silence continued for a while, before someone finally opened his mouth and said, 5,100,000. This person who had spoken seemed to be quite hesitant. After all, this sum was not small. Another dozen or so people began to bid after him. However, the price still remained below 6 million. 6,500,000. Chen Ying from the illusionary demon sect suddenly spoke out at this moment. These people quickly shrunk back at his appearance. It was likely that they did not wish to compete with the former. 7 million. Lindong watched this scene, before finally sighing as he opened his mouth. Whoosh! Lindong's voice had just sounded, when countless pairs of eyes shot over. Even Tang Dongling on the stage looked at him in astonishment. It was likely that she did not understand why he would bid for this black corpse. Moreover, she also understood Lindong a little. He did not have many Xian Yuan pills. According to the rules, he was not really allowed to bid. However, she did not say anything at this moment. It was likely that Lindong was aware of what he was doing. 7,500,000. Chen Ying glanced at Lin Dong, before speaking with a frown. 8 million. Lin Dong was helpless. His expression did not change as he continued to raise the bid. This price was actually approaching his limit. After all, he did not have much Xian Yuan pills to spend. 8 million was already his limit. The price was already quite high after reaching this stage. Even Chen Ying had begun hesitating a little. After all, his true aim was not this unknown black corpse, and this expenditure was too great. Hence, he eventually shook his head and gave up on competing. Lin Dong's heart immediately sighed in relief after seeing this. Before he could completely relax, however, a playful laughter was emitted from the front. 9 million. Lin Dong's expression sunk. He lifted his head, and saw a mocking Xie Yang staring at him from the front. This person seemed to be targeting him. 9 million going once. Is there any higher bid? Tang Dongling quietly sighed in her heart. It seemed that this Xie Yang intended to cause trouble for Lin Dong. However, she was helpless in response to this. All she could do was continue the auction. Lin Dong's eyes became dark, as both of his hands involuntarily clenched tightly under his sleeves. A murderous intent faintly surged within his heart. Lin Dong's fists tightened more and more. 9 million thrice. However, a somewhat young voice suddenly sounded before Tang Dongling's final words were uttered. 10 million. The entire auction ground fell into an uproar. Lin Dong was also startled. After which, he turned his head only to see the smiling Mu Lingshan beside him. An uproar suddenly swept over the auction ground like a wave. Everyone were a little stunned as they looked at the extremely cute girl with 2 pigtails within the seating area. It was likely that they did not expect that the shocking price from earlier had actually come from her mouth. Lin Dong was also stunned as he looked at Mu Lingshan. He never imagined that she would actually intervene in this manner. Who asked that fellow to be so dislikable? Mu Lingshan mumbled. On the auction stage, Tang Dongling was also stunned because of Mu Lingshan's bid. She only recovered a moment later, before looking at Lin Dong as she smiled a little and said, "Little girl, you cannot randomly shout bids in this place. Are you worried that I do not have money?" Mu Lingshan's small mouth frowned, as she spoke in a dissatisfied manner. Tang Dongling shook her head, and looked at Lin Dong in a somewhat helpless manner. The latter returned a helpless smile. After which, he nodded towards her. Although this little girl Mu Lingshan was young, she would not go overboard. Moreover, this 10 million might be a shocking price, but she also possessed an extraordinary background. It was not impossible for her to take out this seemingly large sum in Lin Dong's eyes. Tang Dongling was unable to say anything more after seeing Lin Dong nodding his head. She softly called out, 10 million going once. The original playful expression on Xie Yang's face had become a lot gloomier after hearing these words. Both of his eyes were dark and cold, as he stared at the Lin Dong duo. Soon after, he laughed coldly, 11 million. Lin Dong frowned slightly. Was this fellow planning to continue pressing them? 15 million. Mu Lingshan had clearly become a little furious because of Xie Yang's provocation, and directly stood up from her seat. The 2 pigtails on her head swayed as she once again cried out a price that stirred an uproar. Xie Yang's face twitched. A price of over 10 million was considered quite a big sum even to him. Yet, this little girl of unknown origins had actually cried out such a bid without any hesitation. 16 million. Xie Yang inhaled a breath of deep air, and spoke in a sinister manner. After things had developed to such an extent, everyone could tell that this Xie Yang was purposefully targeting Lin Dong. How could a mere strange corpse be worth such a price? The few big factions at the front of the auction ground were also slightly stunned as they watched this scene unfold. Some interest also rose on their faces. They wanted to see just how this competition would develop. Mu Lingshan stood on the backrest of the chair. Her small hand folded up her sleeve, as her large eyes glanced towards Xie Yang. That expression of hers was filled with great despise. After which, she extended 2 of her fingers. Her clear voice, however, caused many hearts to quiver over the words she had spoken, 20 million. Crash. Another uproar of shock spread. Many eyes widened as they looked at the little girl, who had folded up her sleeve, and was stepping on the backrest of a chair. They could sense a domineering aura heading their way. Was this little girl not a little too fierce? 20 million Shen Yuan pills? Did she think that she was throwing beans? The expression on Xie Yang's face had stiffened because of this sky-high bid of 20 million, and even some perspiration had surfaced on his forehead. His appearance was exceptionally amusing. He did not expect that his attempt to dampen Lin Dong's spirits would actually drag him into this mess. Junior Cave Chief. The black-robed elder beside Xie Yang hurriedly cried out. They still needed to compete for the final article. Spending such a great fortune to compete with others in terms of ruthlessness was truly not wise. Increase the bid, increase the bid. Why don't you increase the bid? However, Mu Lingshan merely placed both her hands on her little waist after seeing the ugly expression on Xie Yang's face, and continued to cry out provocations. Her appearance was originally extremely pretty and cute to begin with. This, along with her clear crisp voice, caused the entire auction ground to laugh out loud, while Xie Yang's expression became increasingly ugly amidst this laughter. You? Fury surged within Xie Yang's eyes. Even with his calmness, being provoked by a little girl in front of so many people still caused him to show signs of exploding in anger. Junior Cave Chief, endure it. Don't be impulsive. The black-clothed elder beside him hurriedly stopped Xie Yang, and repeatedly persuaded him. Xie Yang's body trembled slightly. However, his self-control was quite good. Ultimately, he inhaled a deep breath of air, and suppressed the fury in his heart. After which, he sat back down and ceased speaking. His appearance was quite miserable. Mu Lingshan looked at Xie Yang, who had sat back down in a gloomy manner, as a pleased expression quickly surfaced on her small face. After which, she turned her head and smilingly gave Lin Dong, who was smiling in a helpless and bitter manner, a victory sign. Lin Dong did not know whether to laugh or to cry. He said, even if you have money, you should not be spending it in this manner. Mu Lingshan ignored him. Her small face was filled with an immensely pleased expression. It was likely that she felt extremely good due to having defeated Xie Yang earlier. Tang Dongling watched this farce from the auction stage, and could not help but smile bitterly. After which, she said, if no one else is offering a bid higher than this little girl, this corpse will belong to her. This time around, there was no longer anyone who bidded. After seeing how Mu Lingshan had increased the bid by a couple of million each time, even these large factions that were seated in front had to re-evaluate their wealth. Since no one increased the bid, the auction of the corpse also came to an end. The next auction item was also being brought out amidst the noises that had yet to stop. However, hardly anyone paid attention to it. Many pairs of eyes looked towards the green-clothed little girl with two pigtails. Even those large factions had also shifted their gazes over. It was likely that they were trying to guess Mu Lingshan's identity. After all, the ability to take out 20 million Shen Yuan pills without hesitation was not something that an ordinary person possessed. The auction continued. However, after the intervention of Mu Lingshan earlier, the subsequent auction items were unable to reach a bid of 20 million, despite fetching rather good bids. This caused the atmosphere within the auction ground to decline slightly. Tang Dongling was also helpless in the face of this. Who could have expected that this little girl would actually be so domineering? Moreover, she could only hope that this little girl was not simply randomly bidding. Otherwise, their sky merchant court would likely experience a headache this time around. Lin Dong also saw the core spiritual birth serum that he had auctioned in the subsequent auctions. It was priced at 1 million or so according to Tang Dongling. However, the final transaction price was around 2,500,000 per drop. In this way, the 5 drops of spiritual serum had fetched Lin Dong 12 million or so Shen Yuan pills. This was enough to cover the volcano flame essence stones. Lin Dong heaved a sigh of relief after the core spiritual birth serum was successfully auctioned. He gently leaned on the backrest of the chair, and watched the subsequent auctions from an outsider point of view. The atmosphere in the auction ground gradually climbed upwards under the control of Tang Dongling, as increasingly rare auction items appeared on the stage. This was especially the case when a low-grade pure yuan treasure appeared. Excitement rose within the eyes of many people in the auction ground. This treasure was something that only some of the larger factions possessed. It is something that an ordinary person would not be able to obtain even if he wanted one. Even a pure yuan treasure has appeared. Lin Dong gazed at the auction stage. At this moment, Tang Dongling was holding a dark red longbow in her hand. This longbow was the shape of a phoenix, and the phoenix wings spread apart, forming the body of a bow. A hot and fiery fluctuation lingered over it. It seemed as though one would be able to shoot out flames by pulling a bow. Based on Tang Dongling's introduction, this longbow was called Sky Phoenix Space Shattering Bow. It was a genuine low-grade pure yuan treasure, and was relatively powerful. Of course, it was also quite expensive. The starting bid itself was 10 million. It was obvious that only those large factions were qualified to compete for such an object. Hence, many people could only shake their heads in disappointment after the price was stated. Of course, those large factions present did indeed covet this Sky Phoenix Space-Shattering Bow. The price war that was fought was even more heated than when Mu Lingshan had bid earlier. Within a short couple of minutes, the Sky Phoenix Space-Shattering Bow had been obtained by a big faction called Suspended Valley at a price of 27 million. Lin Dong sighed quietly as he watched the competition come to an end. He was also quite attracted to the Sky Phoenix Space-Shattering Bow. However, he understood that he currently did not have the capital to compete with these large factions in terms of wealth. Although there was Mu Lingshan with a vast unknown amount of wealth seated beside him, it was obvious that Lin Dong would not ask her to bid for him. Next will be our final main auction item. On the stage, Tang Dongling revealed an enchanting smile after the frenzied atmosphere earlier finally calmed down a little. After her words sounded, Lin Dong's sharp senses felt those large factions seated in front all quietly straighten their backs. It seems like they are all after this thing. Lin Dong frowned slightly. From the looks of the situation, these people had clearly come prepared. This had caused him to become a little curious. Just what was it that was able to draw in all these people? The subsequent item concerns a cave dwelling that was rumored to have been left behind by a reincarnation stage expert. I believe that everyone should clearly understand its worth. Tang Dongling's voice had just sounded, when the atmosphere within the auction ground directly exploded. An overwhelming noise spread like a tsunami, as countless people suddenly stood up. The expressions in their eyes appeared rather crazed. Tang Dongling was not surprised by the explosive atmosphere. She immediately clenched her hand, a silver light flickered. Finally, a foot-long silver tower flashed and appeared. An ancient and extremely wild and violent fluctuation spread apart the moment this silver tower appeared. The vague sound of thunder seemed to appear along with it. Lin Dong's eyes had also quickly looked towards the silver tower in Tang Dongling's hands. In the next moment, he suddenly felt the devouring ancestral symbol within his body begin to shake crazily. At the same time, he also sensed a trace of an extremely unique ripple being emitted from the silver tower. That ripple seemed as though it originated from the same source as the devouring ancestral symbol. That is, Lin Dong's pupils had shrunk to the size of a pinhole at this moment, and even his voice had become hoarse. His body, which was seated on a chair, trembled slightly. It's the thunderbolt ancestral symbol's fluctuation. Yang's mumbling voice also sounded at this moment. It was accompanied by an unconcealable shock as it slowly spread. Thunderbolt? Ancestral symbol? The earth-shaking noise that originally reverberated beside Lin Dong's ears seemed to have completely vanished at this moment. Only these four words continued to rumble within Lin Dong's head like thunder. It was as though there was the faint sound of rumbling thunder exploding in his head, causing his scalp to turn somewhat numb. Lin Dong's eyes were a little unfocused as he looked at the silver tower in Tang Dongling's hand. He had never imagined that he would genuinely sense an ancestral symbol in this place after searching for so many years. Others might not be able to sense that special fluctuation from the silver tower. However, Lin Dong, who possessed the devouring ancestral symbol, felt as though he had been electrocuted. That fluctuation of something that originated from the same source was something that nothing in the world could imitate. Lin Dong's pupils, which had shrunk to the size of pinholes, stared intently at the small silver tower. This continued for a long time, before the great storm that raged within his heart gradually weakened, and the deafening noises that had vanished from around him once again surged into his ears. At the same time, it dragged Lin Dong out from his absent-minded state. Gulp. Lin Dong's throat vibrated for a moment. His perspiration-covered hands were gently wiped on his thighs. After which, he softly asked in his mind, "Your senses are not wrong, right? Even if I may be wrong, the reaction of the devouring ancestral symbol within your body will never go wrong." Yang replied, "Those fluctuations hidden within this silver tower does indeed belong to the thunderbolt ancestral symbol." The corners of Lin Dong's mouth involuntarily lifted after receiving confirmation. He quickly exhaled a long breath towards the sky. There was finally a clue after having searched for so many years. "I feel that the location of the second ancestral symbol that you are aware of is very likely the thunderbolt ancestral symbol that is related to the silver small tower," Yang mused for a moment, before commenting. Lin Dong nodded slightly. He also shared this feeling. There were only 8 ancestral symbols in the entire world. The only ancestral symbols other than the devouring ancestral symbol that he was aware of were the darkness ancestral symbol of the Palace of Darkness, and the blazing ancestral symbol belonging to Mo Lua of the Chaotic Demon Sea. This clue that had appeared should be the 4th ancestral symbol, the Thunderbolt ancestral symbol. Since such a clue had appeared in this Chaotic Demon Sea, it was likely that the Thunderbolt ancestral symbol was hidden at a certain spot within the Chaotic Demon Sea. This was similar to the map that Lin Dong had obtained. Hence, it was very likely that the two were referring to the same ancestral symbol. Fortunately, this kind of fluctuation is something that only people like you, who possess ancestral symbols, can sense. Otherwise, once this information spreads, all hell will break loose in the entire Chaotic Demon Sea, Yang said. Lin Dong nodded. If the Sky Merchant Court was aware that this silver tower was related to the Thunderbolt ancestral symbol, they would definitely use all their ability to prevent it from being revealed to the public. They would definitely search quietly, and obtain that Thunderbolt ancestral symbol. This was because everyone knew just how powerful the ancestral symbols were. If the Sky Merchant Court was able to obtain the Thunderbolt ancestral symbol, they would definitely become a pinnacle faction in the Chaotic Demon Sea. An example was Mo Luo. With the blazing ancestral symbol in his hand, which Samsara stage super expert in the Chaotic Demon Sea would dare to fight with him. Even a reincarnation stage expert would have a hard time dealing with a Samsara stage expert who possessed an ancestral symbol. Even though this is the case, it will still be extremely difficult to obtain this small silver tower. Lin Dong frowned slightly. From the expressions of those large factions in front, this silver tower was clearly the target which they had been waiting for. Although these people were unaware that the small silver tower was related to the Thunderbolt ancestral symbol, just the fact that it had been found in a cave dwelling left behind by a reincarnation stage expert alone was sufficient for them desperately try to obtain it. It was clearly an extremely difficult task for Lin Dong to compete with these extremely wealthy fellows for the small silver tower. It is indeed very difficult. Yang also stated. Currently, Lin Dong had yet to become strong enough to deter all the other experts in this place. Hence, he had to obediently sit down and compete for this small silver tower that was related to the Thunderbolt ancestral symbol through ordinary means. However, given their wealth, it was obvious that they were unqualified to do so. Lin Dong pursed his lips as a stern expression flashed across those pitch-black eyes of his. He had spent a great deal of effort in order to find the second ancestral symbol. Since he had discovered a clue, there was naturally no reason for him to give it up. He must obtain the small silver tower at all cost. Oh! Lin Dong suddenly turned around, while a stern expression flashed across his eyes. After which, he became startled. This was because he could see that Mu Lingshan beside him was actually also staring at the small silver tower on the auction stage in a somewhat absent-minded manner. "Brother Lin Dong, that thing seems a little special." Mu Lingshan lifted her clear large eyes to look at Lin Dong. After which, she spoke in a voice that only the two of them could hear. The corners of Lin Dong's eyes involuntarily twitched upon hearing this. There was some disbelief deep within his eyes. Could it be that this girl had also sensed the ancestral symbol fluctuation from the silver tower? But how was this possible? This girl did not possess any ancestral symbol. How was it possible for her to detect that unique fluctuation? It is indeed extraordinary. Lin Dong suppressed the shock within his heart and nodded. Currently, he did not have the mood to find out how Mu Lingshan could sense this fluctuation. What he needed to think of now was how he could obtain that small silver tower. Tang Dongling watched at the surging atmosphere from the auction stage and involuntarily smiled. Her pretty eyes looked at the small silver tower in her hand, before she smilingly said, "This tower's starting bid is 30 million Xian Yuan pills." The originally explosive atmosphere immediately turned sluggish after this price was announced. Soon after, countless individuals sat down in a depressed manner. Such a price was something that even some of the wealthy large factions would have to consider carefully, and even less needed to be said about them. Moreover, this was only the initial price. Just what kind of terrifying price would it reach after the subsequent bidding war? The commotion had become much quieter in the face of this shocking price. Even those large factions in front frowned slightly and wore grave faces. "Ha ha, since no one is going to start, my demonic wind cave shall initiate the bidding." Xie Yangs greedily looked at the small silver tower. He licked his lips and laughed, 32 million. If your demonic wind cave is so rich, why didn't you suppress that little girl earlier? My Sky Tablet sect offers 35 million. A middle-aged man in black clothes laughed. His laughter contained some mockery. He was someone from the northern Xianxi Sky Tablet sect, and had quite a strong background which was not weaker than the demonic wind cave. Since everyone is showing such interest, my universe cave shall also join in. 38 million. A white-clothed Zhu Gan, who had yet to join a single bid since the beginning, laughed and said, "Ha ha, my suspended valley offers 40 million. It has begun." Lin Dong leaned on the backrest of his seat and watched this bidding war that had erupted without warning. Both of his eyes slowly narrowed. Such a price had kicked him out of the competition right from the start. Clearly, he had already lost the qualification to compete with these large factions according to the rules. "Do not participate in this competition." Lin Dong tilted his head, looked at Mu Lingshan and shook his head. This little girl seemed intent to give it a try. "Why?" Mu Lingshan asked in a puzzled manner. She could tell that Lin Dong was also extremely interested in that small tower. "Forget about whether you can outbid those people. Even if you can, will we be able to successfully bring it away with only our strength?" Lin Dong softly inquired. Mu Lingshan was taken aback. Although she felt some unwillingness, she still nodded her head. She might be a little naughty at times, but she was not stupid. She clearly understood that even if she successfully bought this small silver tower in front of countless pairs of jealous eyes, it would be an extremely difficult matter to successfully take it away. This was not only the case for the two of them. It was the same for those large factions competing for it in front of them. The other factions who had failed in outbidding them would likely not give up so easily. This auction was merely the first round in the competition for the small silver tower. "Who?" Lin Dong exhaled gently. His cold eyes looked at the increasingly intense competition before him. Since he was unable to obtain this small silver tower through proper means, he could only take an unorthodox approach. In any case, he must obtain this small silver tower at all cost. This video will end here.